quiet town of Marshfield, Wisconsin, stood a small farmhouse surrounded by endless fields of golden wheat. To outsiders, it was peaceful, almost picture-perfect, but on one cold November morning in 1984, that house became the stage of one of the most gruesome family massacres the state had ever seen. The Schmidt family, a family of 5, was found brutally murdered inside their own home. No sign of forced entry. No neighbors heard a thing. Just silence and blood. What unfolded after that discovery would shock investigators, haunt the community for decades, and reveal the disturbing truth hiding behind the walls of that farmhouse. They say small towns are built on trust. On quiet mornings, friendly waves, and familiar faces. But in the town of Marshfield, Wisconsin, trust would become the very thing that died first. It was November 12, 1984. The air was bitter, the kind that makes your breath linger like smoke, and inside a small farmhouse on the outskirts of town, the Schmidt family prepared for what should have been an ordinary night. Harold Schmidt, a 42-year-old mechanic known for his steady hands and hard work, had just returned home from a long day at the garage. His wife, Linda, a teacher at the local elementary school, was cooking dinner while their children, Eric, 15, Megan, 12, and little Ryan, just 8 years old, set the table. From the outside, everything seemed normal. The porch light flickered, casting a soft glow over the frosted grass. A family dog barked in the distance. It was one of those peaceful scenes you could paint and hang on a wall. Nothing out of place, nothing unusual. But sometimes horror hides in the ordinary. Sometimes evil walks quietly through unlocked doors. At 9:17 p.m., the Schmidts' nearest neighbor remembered hearing what sounded like a door slam. He thought nothing of it. After all, rural homes often creak and groan with the wind. What he didn't know was that, at that very moment, an uninvited figure had already stepped inside the Schmidt home. Someone who knew them. Someone who once shared their bloodline. The night grew colder. The lights in the Schmidt house dimmed one by one. But behind those walls, something unthinkable was unfolding. Investigators would later call it a crime of quiet rage. A slaughter that lasted less than 20 minutes, but would haunt the town for generations. The next morning, just after sunrise, the mail carrier noticed something strange. The front door of the Schmidt home was slightly ajar. Swaying gently in the wind, the dog barked endlessly, its chain pulled taut. Out of concern, the carrier approached, calling out for Harold or Linda. No answer, only silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, unnatural. He took a step inside. And what he saw next would stay with him for the rest of his life. Harold Schmidt was lying near the living room sofa, his body twisted unnaturally, a dark stain spreading across the floorboards. The shotgun blast had been precise, close range, fatal instantly. The television still hummed in the background, a static buzz that made the scene feel even more unreal. In the kitchen, Linda lay face down beside a shattered coffee mug, her hands covered in deep defensive wounds. She had fought for her life, for her children, but she hadn't stood a chance. Upstairs, officers found what one detective later described as the most haunting scene of his career. The children were in their beds, as if still asleep, each one shot once, execution style, without even time to wake. Their small rooms, posters on the walls, toys scattered on the floor, stood frozen in time. A snapshot of innocence destroyed in the most violent way imaginable. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no shattered windows, nothing stolen. This wasn't a robbery. This was personal. The killer had moved through that house with purpose, knowing exactly where each family member would be. It was rage turned methodical, a storm of hatred masked by cold calculation. When police began their investigation, the town went into collective shock. Marshfield had never seen anything like it. Doors that were once left unlocked were now bolted shut. Neighbors who used to greet each other over fences now avoided eye contact. It was as if everyone suddenly realized that evil didn't always wear a stranger's face. It could wear the face of family. Detectives scoured every inch of the property. They found Harold's wallet still on the kitchen counter, his tools neatly stacked in the garage, Linda's school papers organized on the dining table. But one detail stood out, a faint boot print near the back door. It was smeared in blood. But the size, the shape, it was enough to suggest the killer wasn't a stranger wandering in the night. The autopsies confirmed what investigators feared. The family was killed between 10 p.m. and midnight. Harold first, then Linda, then the children, one by one. It was efficient, controlled, almost rehearsed. Whoever did it had been there before, knew the layout of the home, and moved without hesitation. Within hours, the media swarmed the town. Reporters called it the Marshfield Massacre. Headlines spoke of nightmare in Wisconsin's heartland. But for those who knew the Schmidts, it wasn't a headline. It was heartbreak. Harold had grown up there, fixed the locals' cars, helped neighbors plow snow in the winter. Linda had taught half the children in the community how to read. And now, their entire family was gone, wiped out in one night of unimaginable brutality. As investigators pieced together the timeline, they began to suspect that this wasn't random. Someone had a score to settle. Someone who knew the Schmidts well enough to enter without fear, to move through that house like it was their own. A few neighbors mentioned a familiar face seen around town recently. Someone who hadn't been there in years. Harold's brother, Thomas Schmidt. The black sheep of the family. The ex-con. The one Harold hadn't spoken to in over a decade. And that was when the story began to twist. Because beneath the image of the perfect small-town family, there were secrets. Buried grudges. Old betrayals that had never truly died. The massacre wasn't random at all. It was personal, terrifyingly, intimately personal. That night of silence wasn't just a murder. It was a reckoning long in the making. A storm that had been gathering for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when it did, it left nothing but ghosts behind. When investigators stepped into the Schmidt house that morning, they didn't just find a massacre. They found secrets, quiet, festering secrets that painted a different picture of the family everyone thought they knew. The headlines had already begun calling it "The Night Evil Came to Marshfield." But as detectives peeled back the layers, they realized the evil didn't come from the outside. It was born within. Harold Schmidt had always been seen as a hardworking man. The kind of husband who mowed the lawn on Sundays and fixed his neighbors' engines for free. But inside that garage of his, behind the stacks of oil cans and broken wrenches, police discovered something that didn't fit the image. Hidden in a locked drawer was a small, leather-bound notebook. The first few pages looked ordinary. Sketches, repair notes, small reminders. But further in, the handwriting changed, shaky, erratic, the words darker. "I can't sleep," one entry read. "Is out there, watching again. Every night feels closer." Another, "I should have never trusted him again. It's my fault he hates me." The name wasn't written, just him, over and over. As if even writing it out felt dangerous, detectives began digging into Harold's past. And what they found made the puzzle far more twisted than anyone expected. 10 years earlier, Harold's younger brother, Thomas Schmidt, had been sentenced to 10 years in prison for armed robbery. What most people didn't know was that Harold had been there that night, driving the getaway car. But when the two were caught, only Thomas went to prison. Harold testified against him in exchange for a lighter sentence. A deal that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The brothers had once been inseparable, grew up in the same small house, shared the same room, even worked side by side in their father's old workshop. But money and betrayal had turned that brotherhood into hatred, and that hatred never healed. When Thomas got out of prison 6 months before the murders, he was a man hollowed by time and rage. He'd written letters to Harold, but they were never answered. He'd shown up at family gatherings only to be turned away. Harold had moved on, or at least tried to. He had his family, his job, his home. But to Thomas, it wasn't forgiveness. It was theft. Harold had stolen his life, his years, and now he wanted them back. Neighbors remembered seeing a truck idling near the Schmidt property in the weeks leading up to the murders. At first, no one thought much of it. In a town where everyone recognized each other's cars, it was easy to overlook. But when detectives found tire impressions near the Schmidt farmhouse, they matched perfectly with the treads of Thomas's old Chevy pickup. Then came the fingerprints. One, faint but clear, on the back door handle, belonging to Thomas Schmidt. That was the moment everything clicked. The paranoia in Harold's notebook wasn't random. He knew someone was watching him. He just didn't know how close that someone had already come. Friends of Linda, Harold's wife, told police that she'd been acting strangely in the weeks before the murders. Nervous. Distracted. She told a coworker that Harold had been having nightmares. Waking up drenched in sweat, convinced he heard footsteps outside. She said he'd started locking the doors twice, leaving the lights on in the hallway, even checking the windows before bed. He never said why, but Linda suspected it had to do with his brother. The deeper investigators dug, the more they realized this wasn't just a story of family rivalry. It was guilt. Guilt that had eaten away at Harold for years. The journal entries showed a man who felt his past closing in on him. He wrote about debts unpaid, things undone, voices in the dark. He believed someone was coming for him, and he was right. When police visited Thomas's small rental home on the edge of town, they found what one detective described as a shrine to resentment. Newspaper clippings of the Schmidt family, a copy of the trial transcript from 10 years earlier, and a single photograph. Harold and Thomas together as kids, their arms around each other. Someone had drawn a line down the middle of the photo, slicing their faces apart. The same kind of line that would, years later, divide the family forever. But it wasn't just the brothers' feud that shocked investigators. There was another layer, a quiet tension between Harold and Linda that had gone unnoticed by everyone around them. Financial records showed that Harold was deep in debt. The garage was failing, and the bank was threatening foreclosure. Yet Linda's paycheck, every cent, was being deposited into a separate account that Harold didn't have access to. When questioned, her coworkers revealed she had plans to leave him. She'd even spoken to a lawyer. The night before the murders, Linda reportedly called her sister crying. She said Harold had been pacing the house for hours, muttering about Thomas showing up again. She said he told her, "If he comes here, it'll end tonight." Those were the last words anyone heard from her. When the police pieced all of this together, the story transformed from a simple family tragedy into something far darker. A web of betrayal, fear, and revenge that had been building for years. Harold wasn't the innocent victim everyone thought he was. He was a man haunted by his own decisions. A man who'd betrayed his own blood and lived every day waiting for that betrayal to come back to his doorstep. And when Thomas returned, he didn't come with forgiveness. He came with fury. That small farmhouse in Marshfield was never just a home. It was a powder keg of secrets, old wounds that had never healed, sins that had never been confessed. and a storm of rage waiting for one spark to ignite it all. That spark came the night the Schmidts went to sleep. Unaware that the past they had buried was finally coming home. When Thomas Schmidt sat in the interrogation room for the first time, he didn't look like a killer. He looked tired, almost hollow. A man whose eyes had seen too many nights behind bars and too few chances at redemption. But as detectives pressed him, the calm began to crack, and the story that spilled out was darker than anyone expected. He said he'd gone to see his brother Harold that night to make things right. He said they'd argued, but he left before anything happened. He swore he hadn't touched anyone in that house. But the truth was bleeding out from every corner of the crime scene. The shotgun shells found in the living room matched the ammunition from a box in Thomas's truck. The tire marks behind the property matched his vehicle exactly. And the boot print near the back door was the same size, the same wear pattern as the boots Thomas had been wearing when he was arrested. Forensic evidence doesn't lie. It only whispers what people try to hide. Detectives knew they had their man, but what they didn't know, what they couldn't yet understand, was why. Why kill not only his brother, but the innocent family that had nothing to do with the betrayal of years past? Why destroy every trace of the life Harold had built? When the questioning turned to motive, Thomas's voice changed. The calmness evaporated, replaced with something sharp, something venomous. He said Harold stole everything. Not just money, not just years, but his future. He said Harold betrayed him, lied to the courts, took the deal that should have been his. And when he came home from prison, he expected one thing: an apology. But Harold wouldn't even open the door. In his mind, the night of November 12th wasn't murder. It was payback. It was justice. Prosecutors would later call it revenge painted in blood. Thomas told police that when he arrived at the house that night, Harold was already awake. The two argued in the living room, voices low at first, then rising. Neighbors heard nothing. The farmhouse sat far from the road, surrounded by trees that swallowed sound. When Harold reached for the phone, Thomas said something inside him broke. Years of humiliation, rejection, and rage erupted all at once. The shotgun went off. One pull of the trigger, and his brother fell. But once that first shot echoed through the house, there was no turning back. Linda rushed in from the kitchen, screaming. Thomas said he didn't remember pulling the trigger again, but he did, again and again. By the time silence returned, the entire house was soaked in it. Upstairs, the children were still asleep. He didn't have to go there. He could have stopped. But something in him decided there would be no survivors. No witnesses. No reminders of Harold's so-called perfect life. He moved through each room with mechanical precision. One shot, then another, until the only sound left was the creak of floorboards and his own breath. Detectives said his confession wasn't just chilling. It was detached, emotionless. He described it like he was recounting a memory that didn't belong to him. No remorse, no sorrow, only justification. During the trial, the courtroom was packed. The entire town of Marshfield came to watch. Reporters filled every seat. They wanted to see the man who had turned brotherhood into bloodshed. When Thomas was led in, wearing a grey prison uniform, he stared straight ahead, never once looking toward the gallery where Harold and Linda's surviving relatives sat. The prosecution presented its case with brutal clarity. They laid out the evidence, the fingerprints, the ammunition, the confession, the motive. They painted Thomas as a man consumed by hatred, someone who let revenge rot his humanity until nothing was left. The defense tried to argue diminished capacity, claiming Thomas had suffered psychological trauma from his years in prison, that he wasn't in control that night. But the jury didn't buy it. Not when faced with what he had done to those children. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty on 5 counts of first-degree murder. Life imprisonment without parole. But it wasn't the verdict that broke the courtroom's silence. It was what Thomas said after. When the judge asked if he had any final words before sentencing, Thomas leaned into the microphone and said, "He took my life first. I just gave it back." A single sentence, cold, bitter final. Even behind bars, Thomas never expressed regret. He became withdrawn, barely speaking to anyone. In prison, he earned a reputation as a ghost. Someone who ate alone, who never joined conversations, who spent hours staring at the wall of his cell. The guards said sometimes they'd hear him talking to himself, mumbling things no one could make out. One inmate swore he heard Thomas say, "It's quiet again. They're all quiet now." Outside those prison walls, the town of Marshfield tried to heal. But how do you heal from something like that? The Schmidt name became a shadow. The house where it all happened sat empty for years. A silent monument to a family torn apart by blood and betrayal. People driving by would lower their voices, as if speaking too loudly near it might wake something best left sleeping. Some said Thomas got what he deserved. Others said Harold did too, that his lies, his selfish choices, had created a monster. But one thing everyone agreed on. The line between guilt and innocence had never felt thinner. The case wasn't just about one man's madness. It was about how betrayal festers, how it grows in the dark until it becomes something unrecognizable. Thomas Schmidt didn't walk into that house as a stranger. He walked in as family. And that made it all the more horrifying. After the trial ended and Thomas Schmidt was locked away for life, Marshfield tried to return to normal. But how do you return to normal when something like that happens on your doorstep? When an entire family is erased in one night and the man responsible shares their last name. The Schmidt farmhouse stood alone on County Road 12. Its paint peeling, its windows dark. No one wanted to go near it. The police had finished their investigation, but even after the crime scene tape came down, locals swore the house didn't feel empty. The smell of smoke, dried blood, and dust clung to the walls long after the cleaners had done their work. The neighbors said it was like the house itself refused to let go. For a while it sat untouched. A "for sale" sign went up, but no one called. Not a single offer. Every real estate agent in town said the same thing. The moment people stepped inside, they felt it. The air heavy. The floors cold. One agent told a reporter that she heard something upstairs. Soft footsteps. Even though the rooms were empty. She never went back. People began to whisper that the Schmidt house was cursed. That the land had soaked up too much pain to ever feel clean again. Teenagers dared each other to sneak in at night, bringing flashlights and cameras. Some swore they saw lights flicker in the windows. Others claimed to hear voices, faint crying, a woman's whisper, a child's laugh cut short. The police dismissed it as imagination, but fear has a way of spreading faster than reason. By the late 80s, the farmhouse had become a local legend. Parents told their kids to stay away, not because of ghosts, but because of what the house stood for. It was a reminder of betrayal, of broken blood ties, of how evil doesn't always wear a stranger's face. It can come from the person who once shared your childhood bed, the person who once promised to protect you. Then one night in 1991, something happened. A fire broke out on the property, a blaze so fierce it could be seen from miles away. By the time firefighters arrived, the structure was gone. Only the stone foundation remained, blackened and broken. The official report listed the cause as accidental electrical failure, but no one in Marshfield believed that. There hadn't been electricity running to the property in years. Some said it was arson, that someone wanted to erase the last piece of the tragedy. Others whispered something darker, that the house had finally burned itself out, tired of carrying the memories it held inside. After the fire, the land was left vacant. Grass grew over the ashes. The wind moved through it like it was mourning. For a long time, no one touched it. Then, a decade later, a developer bought the property. Plans for new housing were drawn up, but every time construction began, something went wrong. Machinery would break down. Foundations would crack. Workers reported feeling watched. A few refused to go back. The project was abandoned after that. Today, if you drive past what used to be the Schmidt property, there's nothing there. Just an empty field, a scattering of old stones, and a faint path where the front porch used to be. But the people who've lived in Marshfield long enough will tell you that sometimes, late at night, when the air is still and the moonlight hits just right, you can see something in that field. A flicker, a shape, like a house standing where no house exists anymore. Those who believe in ghosts say it's the family, trapped in the moment they died, forever repeating that silent night. Those who don't believe say it's just the past, echoing, refusing to be forgotten. But either way, everyone agrees on one thing: the Schmidt tragedy changed the town forever. For years after, neighbors locked their doors earlier. Parents checked in on their kids twice before bed. The local school held assemblies about conflict and forgiveness, using the Schmidt case as a grim warning. Even the pastor at St. Mary's Church began including sermons about the dangers of holding on to anger. He said, "When hatred finds a home in your heart, it becomes a ghost that lives longer than you do." People wanted to forget. They tried to build over the pain, to bury it under the routines of daily life. But the thing about trauma is that it doesn't disappear. It lingers, reshaping everything it touches. For the people of Marshfield, the massacre became more than a story. It became a mirror, a reflection of how easily love can twist into something unrecognizable when guilt and vengeance take root. Some of Harold's old friends kept visiting the graves. 5 small headstones lined neatly beside each other. They'd leave flowers, toys, or small notes written in shaky handwriting. One note, left anonymously years later, read, "You didn't deserve this, but maybe you knew it was coming." That sentence captured what everyone felt, but no one dared to say. Deep down, the town couldn't decide who the true victim was. Was it the family who lost their lives, or was it Thomas, a man twisted by betrayal until he became something monstrous? Or was it both? Over time, the Schmidt story faded from newspapers, but never from memory. The people who lived through it could still point to the place, still tell you exactly where the house once stood. Some say you can still find shards of burnt wood buried under the soil, fragments of a life that was supposed to be peaceful. And even now, decades later, when the wind sweeps across that empty field, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke, the people of Marshfield know the story of the Schmidt family isn't over. It lives on in whispers, in nightmares, in the uneasy silence that falls whenever someone says their name.